All right, it's 7:30, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. We are meeting again was that a question? Oh, no. We're meeting on Zoom again this morning for Governor Baker's executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law that was issued in March of this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. This meeting is being recorded. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. This is for all of us, as well as for all the participants and attendees who are in the audience, the virtual audience, that is. If you have a question, raise your hand. Please note that we will not be using the chat or the Q&A functions in this meeting. When it's your time to ask a question, please turn on your video because it helps us identify the questioner with the face so we have a better relationship with our customers. If you've dialed in via phone and would like to raise your hand, I believe you can do that by pressing *9. And if you've dialed in and you're being called upon to speak, you can press *6 so that you can be heard, and then *6 again to mute when you're completed. And I think those are the housekeeping items for this morning. I just want to make sure the board is all in line that our next meeting is scheduled for January 13th, and the following one is February 10th. Any conflicts that you're aware of in your ability to attend either one of those? I don't want to go too far out into the future because I don't know about you, it's hard to schedule right now. Everything's open, but seeing no comments, we can move on to the main purpose, the singular purpose of this meeting today, which is a discussion of the 2021 budget. Our job in this meeting is to vote to either support or not support the budget as presented, and perhaps there'll be an edit or two, I don't know. But the goal of this meeting is to approve the budget for 2021. And with that, I hand it back to Dave. Yeah, Gordon.
Have we selected a clerk for this meeting?
Good question. Do I have a volunteer for a clerk?
Well, I did it last time. Would anyone else like
to? I did it last time, but I'll do it.
Okay.
And just a question, since we don't have minutes to approve, do we have any draft minutes that are in the works? Are you aware of, David?
We have minutes that are in the works, but they're not ready.
Okay. Thank you. I think we are a couple months behind, but not sure.
Yeah, I'll check on that after the meeting and let you know.
Okay,
but.
No problem. All right, on to the budget presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
So hopefully everyone got the PDF version of the draft budget, and hopefully you guys have had a chance to take a look at it. Aaron did put together the hard copies, and I know some of you picked them up at the light plant. With that, Matt's going to go through a presentation, and we'll field any questions you have. But we're going to do a high-level overview first, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for you guys to ask questions. I'm sure you'll have some. So, Matt, you can share your screen if you want to put the presentation up.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, good morning. We're going to go over the 2021 operating forecast for the light plant. For those of you that were involved last year, it's going to look very similar. In the bottom left, you're going to see a page reference that corresponds with the book that you have in front of you, if you have the book. It also ties in with the PDF version as well, so take a look there. I did add some animation, some light animation in here. I don't usually like to do that with PowerPoints, but I think it's better for Zoom purposes for you to be able to see what I'm referring to. So sorry about that if that makes you nauseous. So the first thing is the light plant debt service, outstanding debt. I did notice this is the one big mistake I found when I was putting the presentation together is in your version, the green portion, which is the AMI, anticipated AMI debt, is off a year. It did not update in the version you have. So I will send out a correction with that. But
Oh,
Which direction off a year?
And
it
which
should,
year?
the green starts in 2020 on your version, and it should be 2021.
Uh,
okay.
And these are just at kind of rough estimates of, we're not really sure what exactly we're going to end up with debt wise for the AMI. Just so you know that. And then the other thing I was going to point out is most of our current debt falls off in 2026. So we're nearing the end pretty soon for some of this older debt. Moving on, this is the light plant's 5-year capital plan. I've got a few, you'll see the red things pop up here in just a second. The first thing I wanted to point out was the subtrans station equipment. If you remember last year, we talked about, we have these cables that run from the main station to the stations, and they are quite expensive. And we're going to start testing those year over year to see if we need to replace them. We did not put the cost of the replacement of those wires in here. If that comes to bear, it'll be pretty expensive. But that will probably not happen until 2024, 2025. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, and I mean, the money that's set inside there is really for testing those circuits so that we can see if we need to replace them or not. They run from one substation to another, and there's four sets of them. So if that happens, it'll be a long-term, multi-year project for replacement.
And I should have said already, if you guys have questions, please feel free to stop me. Moving on, this is the second page of the 5-year capital plan. The first item I wanted to point out is the station equipment. We are going to be, in 2021, we are planning to replace some meters on the distribution circuits at our main station, or actually at the secondary station. The next one is the underground items. You'll see some bigger expenses in 2021 and 2025. The 2021 portion is related to projects that we've started. We've laid conduit down, and we're going to actually put wire in those conduits and electrify them, and I believe we're going to take down some overhead stuff as well. And then in 2025, that's about when we expect our underground funds to be replenished. So that's where we'll pick up some a new project to do some underground conversions.
Question, Dave. So this is the normal way this fund works, where it kind of builds up for a few years and then we do a project. I know that there's conduit in the ground without cable. How much of that is waiting for cable, waiting for the, how much is in the ground waiting for us to take it off the wires and put it underground?
There's about probably close to 2 miles of conduit in the ground without wire. And we collect around, let's call it around 400,000 a year in the surcharge. So it takes about 3 years to collect enough to do about 1 mile.
And that's, so the empty conduit that's waiting for cable, what's the difference between putting wiring into that versus doing a brand new, put the conduit in the ground and add cable? Is there a big price delta? Construction cost is a lot, but I look at this as, we've dug a road up, put conduit in, contacted each homeowner, put the conduit to their house, and it's been 5, 6, 7 years while we're waiting to convert it. So I think we have an obligation to finish the projects that we started. And this has been the way it's gone for years, where it takes, we go through, we put the conduit in, and then the customers are waiting for a number of years while the funds replenish. We would have already done and completed this one, but we did shift gears. and prioritize the fund onto Cambridge Turnpike, which is a big project for the town. So, you know, the next area we're going to is Grant, Belknap, Elsnore, that area, to finish up.
Great. Thanks.
We don't have to discuss it here, but I'm just kind of interested in thinking about, you know, maybe there'd be some way we could accelerate the undergrounding, and the benefits to the town would be improved resiliency in the, you know, ice and wind. And also, would that potentially also mean that we wouldn't have to spend as much on tree trimming? And, you know, if we could, basically, we've got a 100-year project right now. If we could actually take a look at it and think about, is there any way to turn this into a near-term, you know, our generation project, that maybe do some borrowing, just get the thing done and move on. But anyway, we don't have to go into that here.
Yeah, we can have a further discussion on that later, if you guys want to. It is a discussion. It's a big topic.
Yeah.
You know, we can get into that later if you want.
Okay, the next item, as you'll remember, I think this was pushed back a year. Last year it was scheduled for 2021, but because of COVID, we have delayed the AMI rollout, and then also we're dealing with the consultant too. So, so these big expenditures in the meter area are for the AMI project. Transportation equipment in 2021 and 2022, we're budgeting a pretty big amount in this area. And the reason is we're going to replace, in both those years, we're going to replace a bucket truck and a passenger vehicle. Some of our trucks and vehicles are getting pretty old and costly to maintain, so it's better to just get new ones.
And Matt, it's probably worth mentioning that we are looking at replacing one of the bucket trucks for 21 with a hybrid bucket truck, which would be the first that we had. So that's exciting and different.
Yeah, great.
The last item I just wanted to point out, our mini excavator is very old and coming to end of life, so we're going to be replacing that. We expect to replace that in 2022. This slide shows the blue shows the net change in capital over year. The green shows additions and the red shows retirements. Not much to really talk about here, except for I wanted to point out that 2017 was when we did some undergrounding. I think that might have been the beginning of those projects that we had just talked about. And then obviously in 2021, we're going to pick those up. And so that's why you see the big additions in those years. This graph shows the operating and maintenance costs by category. Obviously, starting in 2019, our admin and general costs kind of picked up, and that seems to be kind of the trend that we're going to, that those elevated O&M costs are going to be consistent. And then this shows the detail of that previous slide. A few things I wanted to point out. Oh, actually, before I get to that, so during COVID, we had a lot of folks or a lot of staff that worked they were half in the office, half at home, not working. So those days that they were at home, not working, all of their salary went to the admin salary line. As opposed to the function where they were working. So a lot of these things on this slide, you'll see like maintenance of overhead lines. They didn't do as much of that in the year because they were only working half the time. So a lot of these expense items are going to go up as opposed to the admin and general salaries we're going to see go down. So I just wanted to point that out because you may have some questions in that regard.
Well, I had a quick question about the tree trimming.
Sure.
Oh, are you going to get to it?
Yeah, that was one of my.
All right, then I'll hold my question till the end.
Okay. So this first line item is related to what I just spoke about. There's going to be a slight increase because we are planning on, we're seeing a lot more storm activity. So we increased this expense item a little bit because of that. But the remainder is COVID, the absence of the COVID time going to this expense code.
And Matt, just to add to that, I think it's important for the board to know that the prevailing wage for tree trimmers changed significantly. And so that also contributing to the increase in the number you're seeing there.
So Matt, it's Wendy. Can you just go back? So you talked about that admin function. So when people are in the office versus out doing the lines. So I understand the increase in the overhead lines, but you're saying it's understated in 21 because in 20 because we weren't just performing that function. So are people's time accounting allocated to their function in this
Yes.
cost?
Yeah. So when like the line workers, so most of the office staff, or about roughly half the office staff salary goes to just the admin general. It's pretty standard. That's a salary line item. The guys that are out doing actual functions, their time, their hour of time that they were spent doing overhead lines goes to this line item.
Oh, wow.
Their hour spent on transformers goes to maintenance of transformers. So a lot of that time that was lost due to COVID just ended up sitting in that admin salary because that's just the bucket where it ended up.
I didn't realize you had such a complex time accounting system, but that's good.
Yeah, and that makes it hard to sometimes budget these line items because we never know what's going to happen. But
Okay.
I can't just take total salaries and say it's going to be, we expect total salaries to go up by this much. So the admin general goes up this much. So it is fairly complicated.
Okay.
The next item is the tree trimming. We trimmed half of the town in 2020, and then we are expecting to do the other half in 2021. And I don't know the interval of how often we do that. I think it's every 5 years.
We try and do half the town 1 year, half the town the next year. It used to be a third over 3 years, but we've changed that to 50% and 50%. So we recently trimmed half the town. The other half needs to be trimmed down.
And it's on a 5-year cycle, Dave?
4-year cycle.
4-year, okay.
Yeah, and 80% of the growth happens in the 3-year cycle.
Okay.
And so it's a 4-year cycle.
Okay. Thanks.
The next item is maintenance of underground lines. This is I just wanted to point out this increase is strictly related to the COVID. You see it dips in 2020 and it will pick back up in 2021. There's a big increase in street light maintenance. This is, I believe we have some older street lights that need to be repaired. We've kind of put this project off and we're going to try to pick that up this year.
Yeah, so a lot of the costs in this category are for the downtown streetlights. We have conduit issues where conduits are failed and have some lights that are out. We need to spend some time figuring out how to make those necessary repairs. And so that's why the cost is up in 21.
Dave?
Yep.
Are the newer generation LED lights less expensive to maintain?
So far, yes. The answer is yes. We haven't had to do maintenance. But, we'll truly have a good feel for that, after 10 or 15 years if they hold up. We have had some that have failed. They were replaced under warranty. For the most part, maintenance is supposed to be virtually zero. That's the idea behind it. So hopefully that holds true.
That's still separate from conduit problems and other electrical problems feeding the actual light.
Correct.
Okay, this is the second page of the operating and maintenance detail. Not a whole lot to talk about. I just wanted to point out, we're going to talk about the CARES budget in a couple slides. And I wanted to point out that these 4 expense items make up the CARES budget. And then I also wanted to point out in 2020, we had, we wrote off some MR accounts, or some M&J accounts, which we hadn't done, I think, in a long time. There were some really old accounts that we were not going to collect on, so we wrote those off. And then as far as the electric account write-offs, you see it's kind of all over the board. There's a big one in 2019, and then I think in 2020 we started to do the write-offs more consistently. So I think what we're going to see is a more consistent number in that upper $20,000 range. Hopefully COVID doesn't expand this, but it actually looks pretty, our AR looks pretty good so far.
Quick question. M&J?
Sorry, that's a industry slang. It's a merchandising and jobbing. So it's essentially whenever we do a project that is a charge job for a customer, like construction, or we trying to think what else. If we do like an underground conversion, stuff like that for somebody's home.
Great, thanks.
Just a request on when you have abbreviations and acronyms that I might not understand, could you please, for the first time you use them, say them?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about my ignorance, but it's better than me interrupting and asking.
Yeah, sorry. I'll make sure I do that going forward.
No problem. Nope, it's my educational process. Sorry.
It's a good point, Pamela, and we've done that in the past where we issued a list to the board, and we can do that again.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Okay, this is the last slide of the operating and maintenance schedule. The first item is the big item we'd already kind of spoken about, the admin and general salaries. Obviously, the increase in 2020 was mainly due to COVID, a lot of those COVID salaries going into this bucket. We also had, I believe, a couple extra staff compared to the prior year. And then other than that, there shouldn't be anything really impacting this that in 2021, most of those COVID salaries have gone away as we're now working remotely or in the office, so there's no downtime. The next item is the office and supplies expense. You'll see this trending down. The main reason is we no longer have any temp employees. And I know somebody's probably thinking, why is employee time going to office supplies and expenses? Well, this is the best bucket according to FERC that we could find. So that's why that's going down. And then the last item is miscellaneous outside services. In 2020, we had the cost of service study, some IT support costs related to the shifting of the IT department, and a battery consultant that I think all those should drop off in 2021. Okay, so this is the CARES budget. The more appropriate name is the energy management forecast. This kind of goes over all of the conservation items that we do. I'm just going to point out a few things. I'm sure you guys are going to have questions on this. The one thing I wanted to point out is the heat pump promotion. We're planning on really pushing the heat pump in 2021, which we think is a good thing for the town. And then I just wanted to point out a few of the new programs that are coming in 2021, the EV Ready program, the used EV rebate, the air purifier rebate, and the electric patio heater rebate.
What's the used EV rebate? I don't recall that.
So we're planning to roll out a rebate for folks that buy a used EV vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
Electric vehicle. And I also want to point out, obviously, in 2020 we budgeted 783,000, and we brought that number down quite a bit in 2021. We think the 2021 is a little bit more in line with how actual results of past experience. Some of it could be higher than this, but this is kind of our estimate.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at the 5-year average and, you know, kind of tailored what the actuals are versus what our forecast is. So if you look at the last few budgets, we've forecasted much higher than we've actually spent. We've been in the $400,000 to $500,000 range a year, opposed to 7 to 8. So we tried to make this more realistic than what we have in the past. So that's why you'll see the change here if you look at last year's budget versus this year's.
We got to get people using these programs.
Well, you know, and I think that the staff has done a good job promoting these things, and we've had a lot of uptake. But you know, in reality, you have 2 employees that are working through all of these programs, and it's tricky. You know, it's a lot of work, and you know, I think we need to be realistic about what they can accomplish in 12 months versus what we'd like to see them accomplish in 12 months.
I think when the pandemic ends, being able to get out and do events in person will help a lot with promoting these. You know, the bill inserts are great, but most people don't look at them. So
We may also have to,
all right.
we may want to consider at some point hiring outside communications and marketing expertise to help us get out there with these programs. I understand that 2 people can't possibly do the work that we're trying to achieve, but that would leave a big void in the uptake and meeting our goals if we can't get out there and communicate to the public.
Right. And partnering with CSECT and other committees in town to that's not on topic for the budget discussion, but a very, very active discussion with the board. A good one.
Okay, any other questions on the energy management forecast? Okay.
That's a first.
So I will, now we're going to get into the power related stuff. So I'm going to hand this over to Laura to discuss.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Does that mean I'm driving?
Just let me know when you want me to click over to the next slide.
Okay, great. So this slide, some of you may be familiar with this chart on the left. It's busy because it has a lot of information in it. But what it shows is what we believe, how much electricity we believe the town uses in a year compared to the weather. And how much electricity the town uses in a year is made up of a number of different components. The blue section of the stacked bars is the amount of power we import into town, the one that's called RTLO. And Pamela, no need to memorize this. It stands for real-time load obligation, but it doesn't really mean much, but it's conveniently a 4-letter acronym and fits a lot better in a little box like this. So I just kept it RTLO. But that's the number of imports. BTM solar is behind the meter solar. That's an estimate of the amount of power we think people with arrays on their homes and businesses produce in any given year. And the way we estimate it is we know how much PPA solar, that's the amount of solar that CMLP buys contractually from the large solar arrays in town. You know, the WR Grace, excuse me, Kearsarge, and buildings on Virginia Road. So we know how much we bought from them, which kind of tells us how sunny it was out during that time. And we know what the installed capacity is on the behind the meter arrays, because people have to sign up for interconnection agreements with us. And part of that process is letting us know how large their facilities are. So we know how much capacity is being added to the system over time. And we have an estimate of how sunny it was. And we put those two things together and we prepare this BTM, or behind the meter solar, which is customer rooftop installation production. So if you add those three things together, you get how much power we think was used within the town. So you can see it's ranged from the highest number in this series in 2015 of 183,403 megawatt hours to a low. The 2020 number has an E on the end of it. That stands for estimate. That was through November, and I think even a portion of December, with a forecast for the rest of the year. And then the 2021 has an F on the end of it for forecast. So far, the lowest year in the last 7 years has been what we believe 2020 will end up being, which is 174,602 megawatt hours. The purple line is the total number of degree days in a year. And a degree day is a measure of how cold and hot it was in a year. So the higher the number, the colder and hotter it was that year. So correspondingly, the year with the largest usage in 2015 also had the highest number of degree days. You can see there were 6,606, which are plotted on the right axis, versus those megawatt hours, which are plotted on the left axis. And so there's a pretty good correlation between the total amount of power the town uses and how cold or hot it is, for obvious reasons. You know, aside from lighting, people do use electricity to heat and cool their homes. So you can see that despite COVID, 2020 was an extremely low volume year, but it was also an extremely low degree day year. And again, it's forecasted because we're not done with the end of December, but it's pretty close at this point. I don't expect it to change very much. And the bunch of numbers on the right, you don't need to pay too much of attention to. It's simply the granular detail behind those annual degree day totals. So you'll see that and let's see, was that not updated? So you see that the 6,606 number in the graph on the left in 2015 should correspond with the 2015 line all the way to the right, 6,606. And I apologize, 2020 wasn't updated. It's in red because it's a forecast, but on the left it says 5,750 and on the right it says 5,764, but all the other numbers should match. And you can see that what we're using for 2021 is actually the 2010 to 2019 average number of degree days in a year, which is 6,150. So the forecast for load and how much power we think we're going to buy in 2021 is dependent upon the degree days, and the assumption made is basically the last 10-year average. Any questions on that mess of numbers?
Can I point out one thing? For those who are either in the audience and don't have access to this document readily or want to look at it, there's a very good narrative in this section of the budget book, beginning somewhere around page 30, that describes the terms, the terminologies, the definitions. It's comprehensive and very easy to read.
That it is a great narrative. Is that available to the public?
We have not put it on the website yet because it's still draft form, but we will be putting it on.
Okay.
Next slide, Matt. Okay, so this shows the purchase power budget broken out in a couple of different ways. The chart on the left shows the percent of the total budget that we believe we will spend on each component of the purchase power budget, broken out by energy capacity, transmission, fixed charges, and renewable energy certificates. And you can see that the amount we anticipate spending on energy has been, we believe will be going down. Prices in general, commodity prices have been declining. And so we spent 53% of our total energy spend in 2016 was spent on energy. We think only 38% will be spent on energy in 2021. Likewise, capacity, which ballooned in cost in 2017, if you recall, that's the whole reason we set up that
Rate stabilization.
Rate stabilization.
thank you. I'm just drawing a blank. RSF, rate stabilization fund, to manage that ballooning cost. And it did it quite well. Those costs are now coming down. Transmission, unfortunately, has been going up. That sort of goes up 5 to 8% every year. The fixed portion covers costs related to not fixed, but contractual obligations with the Thomas Watson generating facility, costs we spend for E&E, and some other sort of isolated individual costs that don't represent a large portion of the budget, but are roughly 3 to 5% a year. And then the money that we've been saving in energy and capacity, we are now able to devote to greening our power supply. We spent about 10% of our total power purchase expenditures in 2020 on renewable energy certificates and/or renewable energy. And we anticipate that in 2021, that will be 16%. The chart on the right shows expected expenditures by resource type. So you have market-based purchases, and you can see those dropping over the years from 79% to 60%. Fossil, which has always been a very small portion, but has been decreasing. It's not that it's zero in 2020, but it was so small that it didn't even round up to 1%. And in 2021, it's not forecast. We never forecast this. This is only the Thomas A. Watson generating facility that is represented by these numbers. And it's an expensive unit, and it only runs during very limited times of the year. And because it's an out of the money option, we generally don't forecast it in the budget. And when it does run, it's a very small percentage. Hydro has been increasing. As you know, we've invested in some of the Connecticut and Massachusetts older hydro generating facilities that come with Maine Class 2 RECs in the last couple of years. Landfill's been a steady 2 to 3%. Solar, after an increase in 2017 due to
WR Grace.
Thank you, WR Grace. All I could think of was Kearsarge 2. WR Grace, that's been steadied about 6%. Wind, again, increasing with some of the projects we brought online in 2019, anticipate providing about 10%. And then nuclear, which provided 3% this year and will be a bigger percentage in 2021, likely 10%.
And the narrative in this document about transmission is wonderful. I just wanted to mention that. I read through it. It was a great breakdown of those details that often are rounding errors in the bigger picture of transmission that don't get mentioned. So it's a great description.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide.
Laura,
Oh, sorry, Pam.
yeah, so fossil, what is that? Because it's so tiny.
So that is energy that we receive from the Thomas Watson combined cycle power plant that CMLP invested in with a number of MLPs. Dave, do you know the year?
Oh, it was at least 15 years ago.
15 years ago. It runs on natural gas, and when it can't get natural gas, it runs on oil. So it is, as I said, it's a not very efficient unit, and so it only runs during those portions of the year where prices are kind of going crazy. But it provides a very significant benefit way beyond this just small energy component that you see. It provides us with almost 10 megawatts of capacity, which is about 20% of the capacity we have to demonstrate to the ISO that we, Concord, have on hand to meet our load. And if we didn't have this, we'd have to buy even more from the market, and those pink bars on the left would have been even crazier in 2017 because we wouldn't have had a fixed price resource for 20% of the capacity. We would have had to buy 100% from the market, which is fluctuating pretty substantially.
And that's,
And that-
I'm sorry.
That plant is owned and operated by Braintree Electric Light Department. So it's one of the other MLPs.
I see. Okay, that's
Do-
helpful. Thank you.
Do we have a contract with Braintree, or do we have an equity stake in Watson?
It's an equity stake.
It's an equity stake. Okay.
And I,
Well, I don't want to disagree with my boss, but I think it's a very complex contract. It's meant to look like an equity stake, but Pam, as a lawyer, would probably appreciate the fact that it's actually, I believe, a contractual arrangement as opposed to an actual equity stake. So if you looked at it from like a tax perspective and stuff, it would look different if we had an equity stake than our contractual stake. But Dave's right. It looks just like it. We have a percent of the unit, a percent of the costs. So it looks just like we own it, but we don't.
I agree with Laura on that. So we don't disagree. She just said it a little
Okay.
better than I would have.
could I also ask a question? I think that when we talk about the market, most of what we buy from the market is natural gas fed. Is that right?
So this is excellent. I'm glad you brought this up, Alice, because in the past, this often was referred to as natural gas, but I've been careful not to call it natural gas and instead to call it what it actually is, which is grid-based power.
Mhm.
And at any given time, that does not necessarily have to be natural gas. It's whatever unit is on the margin. And on the margin means let's say the region is using 10,000 megawatts, and there are 10,000 megawatts of solar and wind that are available to the grid. This is a completely unrealistic example, but just go with me for a sec here. If we needed one more megawatt hour of capacity, okay, we needed 10,001, and we'd used up all the solar and all the wind, the next unit on the margin might be natural gas. And so we would say that if CMLP was buying that extra 1 megawatt hour, it was actually natural gas based. But if we were only using 9,999 and CMLP needed to buy one more, it could in theory actually be solar or wind that was the unit on the margin. Now, that doesn't happen very often these days, but that could change over time as we get more renewables on the grid. So it's important, I think, to know that we haven't committed to natural gas. We're buying from the grid. And so whatever unit is on the margin on the grid is what we end up getting.
Good description. Thank you.
Any more questions on this?
No, but another great section for the narrative.
Yep.
I'll pay you all later.
It was really helpful. Mine's all underlined in green.
Okay, Matt, I think we can go to the next slide.
All right.
Laura, so
Yes.
on page 36, one of your narrative descriptions says zero emission RECs. I think that should be EFECs. Just
I tried to catch all those after Alice pointed out that I was getting creative with my naming of the zero emission certificates, but apparently I must have missed one, so I apologize.
that's all right. No, just letting you know for the one you put up on the web.
I was just seeing if you guys were actually reading this.
Yeah, it was a great read.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Laura. All right, this next slide is our revenue forecast. I want to point out that the electricity sales are based on, we're expecting normal weather. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, but we figure it's best to go with the average. The 2021 forecast takes into account the new rates based on the cost of service study that we just did, which are effective on 1/1, which you guys are all aware of. Sales are projected to increase 1.4 million, or electricity sales are projected to increase 1.4 million. And I wanted to point out that at the very bottom, if you take out these two numbers, which are the unbilled sales and the rec surcharge, the increase is about 900,000.
Could I ask a quick question on the previous? So private area lighting that Adopt a Light program has ended. Is that correct? Is that the same thing?
We still technically have it with the change with going to NISC. It doesn't break it out anymore. It's combined in, I believe, with the residential. It's just in the residential amount. Unfortunately, okay. I wish we could still break that out, but we had to change the way that our rate structure.
And I don't think we have many customers on that anyway. I don't think we have any, to be honest, but.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking there was one or two left. But
I think the last one we transitioned off of it, but.
Oh.
And is that the same for the farm account? So there's, again, that one also went to zero from very low numbers, but went to zero. Is that incorporated into the residential?
Yes, we can pick that number out, but I can't put it in for our estimate at this point.
But it wasn't Concord lost all its farms.
No.
Okay.
No, it's all still there.
And thank you for clarification on the rec surcharge and the unbilled sales. Those were two other questions I had coming. So.
Yeah, I figure those things are kind of not comparable across all the years on this schedule, so I wanted to take them off and show what the true rate increase was.
Yeah, and probably to add, we have this in here as rec purchase surcharge. It really isn't a surcharge, it's part of the energy component, but we've identified it as a surcharge so that you can see what the revenue is for that.
Matt, can you speak to the controlled hot water? What happened to the accounting in 2020?
Yeah.
The second line there, it went down to, I don't know if it was COVID related, but then it jumps back up in 21 to what looks like a reasonable level. I just didn't know if there was some accounting change.
No, that I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. Obviously, there's a dip in 2019 as well.
Right.
Actually, you know what? I bet the so the 21 forecast is taking old data and adding the new rates onto it. So that might be just a projection from the 2018 amount. I think that my guess is this is a little bit higher than it should be. In total, it's correct as far as total sales, but I think that is probably going to be going down. I'll look into that and let you know.
Okay.
Good catch, Wendy.
The increase in the municipal medium and large group, is that the G2, G3 rate increase? I mean, this looks kind of large over 20, and maybe it's some of the same phenomenon.
Is that anticipation of businesses reopening?
Yeah, it's getting back more to normal, where 2020 obviously the numbers are down because businesses weren't open.
But it's still a substantial increase even from, a more static year like 2019.
It's higher than it's been in the last 5 years for sure. But so some of it probably is rate.
Yes, it is. Some of it is rates.
Yes.
Yeah, I did notice in general going through this that 2019 usually was where things deviated. In 2020, most of them returned, if not a little bit lower. So do we change the method of accounting 2018 to 2019? Because I remember a few years ago, there was a substantial change to how you accounted for a lot of this.
2018 to 2019 should not have changed much.
Okay.
Matt, wasn't it the implementation of NISC in May of 2019?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That
Yeah,
might
but
be
a
it.
lot of, I should have, the big difference was the municipal, and those should all have been corrected out and put back into the right bucket compared to the prior year. So, other than that, there wasn't much in the way of change.
in the it's power purchase stuff. You could see the kilowatt hour or the megawatt hours by generator are kind of jumping around in 2019 and others. So it seems to be pretty consistent that, you know, if there's an outlier number, a lot of them happened around 2019. But that's it. You're explaining most of them. So
Question, Matt. We discussed a second ago controlled hot water meters. And my question would be, is there, in that line is revenues associated with controlled hot water, but do the controlled hot water installations have a dedicated meter? So how would you know how much of the usage or the revenue was attributed to that use?
I believe they have another meter, but I'll defer to Dave on that.
No, there's a control device on the structure that turns it on and off, and calculation is done based on load shed. So it's a calculated thing that we've done.
Got it. Thank you.
But can I mention something? So the accounting system, right, knows when a customer has received a credit related to the controlled hot water heater. And so, yeah, actually never mind. That's a good point, Gordon. I'm not sure. We'll have to look into this.
Okay.
on the EV charging, is that Tour or is that the EV Miles program?
I believe this is just the units that are placed around town.
Oh, okay. So this
These
is
are
the
only the
public
municipal
charging.
ones.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, these are only the municipal charging stations in town?
Correct.
So,
The
yeah.
charge point stations.
Yep, yep. And is there a number for, that we've broken out for, as Brian was asking, EV miles or time of use rate for charging for home vehicles? Is that shown somewhere in these charts that I missed?
No, the expense side, as far as what we've paid out, is on back on the CARES slide, but I'm not sure. I don't have data on behind the scenes data on the EV stuff.
Okay. At some point we might want to
Incorporate
look at
that. We can
Brian.
incorporate some of that in the in next year's for sure.
Well, it would be in the sales projections, right? By the number of EVs in the market charging at home as opposed to the municipal plan. Yeah, we'll look at it in the future.
Okay. And then this next slide is the second page of that same report. The big highlight here is the rate refund and the rate stabilization. So I'll hit the rate stabilization first. The board, if you remember, a few months ago decided, well, the fund was dwindling down to zero, and it's actually negative now. So we ran out of money for this rate stabilization, and the board approved to cease this program a few months ago. And then the rate refund. So I want to, is a fairly complicated structure, and I'll try to get through it. So every month we compare the cost of power with the amount that's budgeted in rates for that cost of power. When the cost of power is less than what the rates, than what is in the rates, we owe money back to the customers. And in that case, we would record a liability, increase the liability. Over time, that generally, in our experience, that's built up into an amount. And right now, our current balance is about $3 million that we owe to the customers. As part of the cost of service study, we decided to use some of that balance, or actually all of that balance, rather than increase. We would have had to increase rates further had we not done that. So we're going to use some of that liability to offset rate increases. And that's why you see this big, large amount in 2021, and there'll be a similar amount in 2022, where we bring that down, that 3 million down to near zero, I believe.
Alice, do you
Yep.
want to, we have Carlin has her hand raised. Do you want to hold on those, or you want to handle them as we go?
I would hope that we could not stop on every page, but could continue with the budget discussion, and then we'll take all questions at the end,
Okay.
just because we have a lot of pages to get through. Is that okay, Carly? Carly?
She can't answer.
Yeah, right, she can. But I don't see her raising a hand to answer that, so. I'd like to continue with the presentation and then take questions.
Matt, can I just ask one question? Just this 3 million that you refer to, was that part of the unrestricted fund balance? Or is this considered a restricted fund because you knew that at some point the cost of the service was less than the rate, so we were accruing this liability?
This is restricted.
Yeah.
It is restricted. Okay, I just want to I assumed it would have been, just want to validate.
And then the last item I just wanted to point out, based on board action earlier this year, the care surcharge was removed, and now that is just in with the regular rates. That was based on board action. So moving on. This is just a graph showing sales volume, and it breaks it down between sources or customer base. Was there a question?
Don't think I see one.
And then this shows the light plant's rate of return. It's a graph showing the rate of return. We'll get to the details in the next slide. Just obviously in 2019, and we're estimating in 2020 that we're going to lose money. And then 2021 looks like we're going to have a pretty good year based on average weather days and average sales. And then here's the detail of the rate of return. They don't really specify exactly what they qualify as rate of return. So it's either, we figure it's either the effective rate of return, which is 1.89, or the DPU formula, which is 1.98. They always stay pretty close. But that's well within the required rate of return expected for 2021.
And it's also worth mentioning that is pretty close to what the board previously asked us to target, was a 2 to 3% return. So we're just about there. We're not quite at 2%, but it's close enough in my estimation.
Okay.
And then I also point out at the very bottom, the net profit margin is 4%, and that just takes profit or net income relative to revenue, operating revenue.
Matt, if you were gonna or maybe David, in a word, we saw a drop, actually net negative in 2019. In a word, or just very briefly, what would that be attributable to? Was it the degree days?
Yeah. Oh, Dave can go ahead. Yeah. So yeah, we believe that our net results year over year are generally attributed to the sales versus cost of power, and we always make more money. We always have higher net income on higher degree years.
And to add to Matt's comment, I think it's important for the board to realize that, you know, we do a cost of service study every 3 to 5 years. This is a prime example of we needed to do one because we weren't, the rates weren't where they needed to be to cover. And so, you know, now that that's completed and, you know, we've adopted new rates, we should be covered for another 3 to 5 years.
And then just one other point, as we move more towards having a higher fixed piece of the billing, in other words, like a higher meter fee, the less sensitive our revenues will be to degree days. Is that right?
In theory, yeah.
Thanks.
Now this slide starts the first telecom slide. So we switched over from light plant to telecom. This is added this year. We didn't have this last year. This is the telecom 5-year capital plan. Not a whole lot to point out, except for I wanted to point out that we are any day now we're going to be receiving a new telecom truck with a boom, which they haven't had before. So that's coming soon. And that's really all that I wanted to point out for their plan. This slide shows Telecom's operating and maintenance costs. As you can see, they've started after a dip in 2019, they're steadily increasing. We've been adding staff, and I think that's we're going to add one more, planning to add one more tech to our staff. So this is the detail of the operating and maintenance. I'll point out here, starting in 2019 through 2021, there's been a pretty big increase in the cost of bandwidth. In 2020, we purchased additional bandwidth when COVID hit. We were kind of running close to running out of, I believe, capacity with everybody being home and using the internet. And then we are planning to purchase a bit more bandwidth in 2021, so we'll see an increased cost there as well.
From my, pardon my ignorance, can you tell me what that means to purchase bandwidth? I mean, we own the system, we own the wires, we connect it, you know, as a service from the town to customers. Where are we purchasing? Is it like purchasing power?
You could look at it that way. We have a few internet service providers that we buy the bandwidth from, similar to power contracts where we buy power from contracts of, you know, different sources. You know, Matt alluded to it at the beginning of the pandemic. We did see a spike, so we appropriately adjusted our contracts, and we're working on adjusting again. And that's in the process, and that's why you're seeing the increases there. But I look at it very similar to power, where, you know, you're buying from different providers a product. And we, you know, in 2020, we have a incredible amount of bandwidth, and it's different than it has been in years past because it's almost constant around the clock, where before you'd see spikes and drop offs. Now it's pretty steady, like a flat line, which is pretty impressive. And it's because people are working from home and that sort of thing. But yeah, the numbers have gone through the roof.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay. This is the next slide of the telecom operating and maintenance detail. I think just one thing I wanted to point out in 2020, we hired 2 new techs, telecom techs. One of them was a replacement from a replacement of a previous position. And then we are planning on adding a network engineer to this area. So that's the increase in 2021. I think that's all I have there. This slide shows the telecom revenue year over year. I guess the maroon portion is the residential, and then you'll see the smaller orange portion is the commercial. Obviously, residential is growing at a pretty steady rate. Commercial's growing, but not as fast.
I'm curious, do we know what our market penetration is in the commercial sector? Have we met most of our commercial needs, or are they hiring Comcast or somebody else to provide that?
Yeah, we haven't penetrated the commercial side significantly yet, and part of that's attributed to the fact that we haven't done any real marketing at this point. But we do have some, just it's not a high volume.
Okay, thank you.
And then this slide shows the revenue detail for the telecom. We are projecting a 15% increase into 2021 from 2020. That's been about it's a little bit less than the growth from 2019 to 2020, but I think that's pretty accurate. And then I wanted to also point out, we were projecting a pretty big increase in installation fees. We have a backlog of new customers that have been waiting for us to install we couldn't install based on COVID rules. So we're planning on picking up a lot of those and expecting new customers as well. So we've got a pretty ambitious goal for 2021 for a lot of installs. So should be good. And then this slide shows the net income for telecom. The green is our revenues. The yellow is expense, and then the orange bar is our net income. As you can see, we started being pretty profitable in 2019, and that's continued through today and into 2021. And then last but not least, the overall combined net income for both telecom and electric. In 2019 and 2020, you can see that telecom, if it weren't for telecom, we would have shown a big loss, but they kind of bailed us out, bailed the electric side out by making a little bit of profit. And then we are projecting a pretty good increase into 2021. And that is that is the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Comments from the board or questions that we didn't get answered on the way?
I just had a question that I've heard in the news that the Comcast has imposed nationwide a data cap that I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it kicks in when a residence uses more than a terabyte in a month.
Yep.
We don't do that. I would think that would be a sort of an advantage we offer to the market or to our citizens that Comcast doesn't. But when I hear about that, I kind of think that maybe Comcast is resentful of people. What do they call it? Cutting the cable and going purely with streaming services, and they want to claw some of that revenue back that they might otherwise have been able to have in their cable TV services, which we don't have that concern. But I was wondering if there may possibly be a very small segment of our telecom users who actually do use bandwidth that, a terabyte a month or something like that, and that might in some sense represent a driver for our need to increase our bandwidth. And any thoughts on all of that?
No.
Okay.
Any thoughts on it at this point? We don't have any customers that are like that at this point anyway, but, so.
Great. So it's an advantage that we offer that they don't. So that's good.
So the overall operating maintenance costs increased about 9%. And that seems to be, if I'm generalizing this correctly, that seems to be a lot to do with put off projects, with new hires. Is that an accurate thought of why a 9% increase in the cost of operating?
Are you referring to into 2020 from 19 to 20?
Yeah, it's right on the page 5. It gives that 9% number
In the executive summary.
in the executive summary, and I did see that in a lot of categories, the things like tree trimming, for example, hasn't been there for the last few years, and now it's here. Purchase of vehicles, those vehicles are probably depreciated and need to be replaced, and they're happening this year. Deferred things like installations, well, this is telecom, but deferred because of COVID lowered costs this year and would increase in the coming year. Is that a very high level general feeling of why that 9% is there? Or is there something else that I'm missing?
No, I think you've got it. I mean, that number is going to vary year to year depending on what is forecast for us to do. You highlighted tree trimming. That's always an item that we bring up in this particular meeting annually because either it's there or it's not, and it's a big number. So you'll see that stuff change. The other thing that's worth mentioning is if it's a year where we have a lot of capital projects, the O&M side will be decreased as well because we can do so much. So this year we have a little bit more in the O&M side, and I think rightfully so. But that's the reason.
Pam?
This very broad question. Do you, over time, does your sector is your sector sensitive to changes in administrations at the national level? That is to say, might you see regulatory changes or funding changes or opportunities as the administration shifts dramatically, or is your work just insensitive to those impacts?
It really depends. I mean, there are some stuff that comes out of the federal side that does impact us, but typically, it doesn't have a huge impact on our budget annually. But if federal regulations change, then that's when it could impact us.
Matt, I had 2 questions. One is, the loan agreement between Telecom and a light plant, is that captured in these line items for Telecom, the expense?
That's a good question. It's probably not in there. We would see, I think the first payment though is in 2022, if I remember correctly. So it wouldn't be, we wouldn't.
Oh, it wasn't. Okay, it wasn't for starting in 21. I thought it was.
Yeah, I'll have to go look into that. That's a good point.
If it is in 21, it's a small payment.
Yeah, I figured it was not so big.
But it's a good point, Wendy, because it might be something we overlooked that we could add in. It's not going to have a huge impact on the overall budget, but we should think about that going forward.
Just the auditors and accounting. And then the other observation I had is that on the light plant on page 14, you're able on the revenue side to break out the electric sales from the meter charges, but then the details are not broken out on page 20 in the next section. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just, maybe for the future, it's worth, if you do that, it was just different. So
the issue here is that well, yeah, I think we could probably do it. on page 14, it's a calculation. And
Okay.
I suppose I could do that here as well. I just have to think about how I would capture it. Because it's going to decrease all of these other buckets that you see. And so, but I think it can be done.
Well, as long as it can be done accurately, I didn't realize that on page 14 it was an estimate. So it's just something for the future because I couldn't find meters when I went looking for it. That's all.
So I wanted to understand that I had a similar question, but maybe it's more elemental. On page 14, when you look at meter charges, I would have assumed that meter charges were constant because they are reflecting fixed costs pretty much. And then we know we're not capturing full fixed costs yet in our meter charges, but there's still great variability in revenue or fixed, what we're getting from the meter charges from last year to what's projected for next year. So I didn't understand that if these are fixed costs, or fixed costs are the same from year to year, obviously for inflation adjusted. So I didn't understand how last year meter charges were 14,000 and next year 400,000.
Well, are you referring to, this right here is the meter charge that Wendy is referring to.
Yeah.
That just takes out of this bucket here. These two, the 26 and the 1.7 agree to page 22, the overall electric sales. And so Alice, I'm a little confused on what you're referring to.
So, okay, so I think I've misread this. I understand. I see it.
And don't forget, we've purposely been raising the amount collected in the meter fee.
In the meter charges.
So these are the revenue side, not the cost side.
Yep, I see that.
Laura had her hand raised. I don't know if she wanted to add something.
Oh, I just was going to mention in response to Pam's question about changes in administration potentially affecting costs. I am cautiously optimistic, actually secretly hopeful, that the change in administration will ultimately bring about a reduction in the cost of renewable energy certificates and renewable energy in general, because the new administration, may take actions that will accelerate and facilitate, the siting of more renewable energy resources. So that could have a big impact on our costs, but it's not something for certain, and it's not something that would take place probably right away.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you.
Are there other questions from the board before we open it to questions from citizens? I don't see anybody at this point, so let's move over to our participants and begin with questions from Carlin Reed.
Good morning. This is Carlin Reed. I am the chair of the PEG Access Committee, but in this particular case, I'm speaking on my own behalf. I had two short broadband questions and two short broadband comments and one short broadband question. The first two comments are kind of like answers. Wendy, I think you're right. I think the loan agreement from broadband to electric, the first payment is 2022, so it would not show up in what you presented here, but watch it for next year. And second, Gordon, I think that if you look at the December 10 video of the PEG Access Committee, you'll hear the Comcast representative talk about the data caps in particular and how they would affect various customers in Concord. Now, those are the two comments. The question I have is this: where in either the electric or the broadband budgets does it reflect a payment in lieu of franchise payment? I would guess about $18,000, not much, but about $18,000 that would go from either the broadband side or the electric side to the PEG Access Fund that the town runs. I didn't see that transfer noted. That's it.
Yeah, that's not something that's highlighted. It's rolled into one of the expenses. It's in there. Just we didn't pull it out as a line item.
Is it possible in the future to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. If that's something that you guys would like to see, we can certainly do that.
I think that would be appreciated by some of the community.
Or an acknowledgement that where it's rolled up into. I think that if we were to take out every $10,000, $18,000 line item, we would have an extraordinarily detailed and long budget that we may not necessarily need going forward, but it's worth thinking about.
It's new, and I think for the next budget, it would be nice to separate it out, because there's a whole committee dedicated to managing this.
Next person who would like to speak is Pamela Dritt.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. I know there's plans for renting storage so that you can encourage more residential solar without the worry that we blow the infrastructure on hot sunny days. Is that in there anywhere? And the other one is, I know you did a wonderful presentation to, I think it was the select board. Is there anywhere that we as the public could watch that?
I'm wondering whether you're referring to the recent presentation made to the Climate Action Advisory Board. Is
Yes, that's what I mean.
right. Laura, is that available?
So I don't know if that was recorded and put on MMN on the YouTube page or not, but I will say that Laura and I will be doing a similar presentation at the select board in January. So I do know that those are recorded and put up there. So if it's not recorded, if that one wasn't recorded, the next one will be.
I can send Pam Dritt the link to the video for the CAB meeting.
Thank you.
It is up there.
The board presentation is scheduled for the 11th of January.
Thank you. And
Okay.
is there somewhere where we could go to look at this budget presentation? Or is that?
So we haven't put this budget presentation on the website yet. It was just finished yesterday for this meeting. But the budget as a whole will be put up on our website once it's adopted.
Little presentations that happen here, can we see them at other
Yeah.
later?
Yes, this meeting is recorded and it will be put on MMN YouTube page.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
For that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Terry Ackerman, next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Alice. Terry Ackerman, I'm a member of the select board, but speaking as an individual, I have two questions. The first question has to do with the section that Laura was talking about. There's a historical load slide. Yes, right. And one thing that I noticed right away is that the green and red, the solar, is increasing significantly and the blue is going down. So that's really good news. What I didn't understand was on the next slide, purchase power budget. On the right side, purchase power volume, the solar is steady around 6%. So I was trying to reconcile between these two slides, and maybe Laura or someone could explain what the difference is.
Sure, Terry, that's an excellent observation and really good for you to note that. The answer is that on the slide we're looking at right now, this refers specifically to the purchase power budget. So this is the amount of money that we spend to buy power versus the slide before this, which had the historical load on it, is not what we spend on power. Matt, could you go back to slide 11?
Yep.
Not what we spend on power, but what the amount of power we believe is used in town. So that what you'll see on this slide is, aside from that increase between 2016 and 2017, the green bars have actually stayed somewhat constant. It's the red section that's increasing. And that red section is the solar that's on people's rooftops. So CMLP doesn't buy that except when it's excess to people's needs. It just reduces the amount of power that people who have solar arrays then need to purchase from CMLP. So Pamela Dritt had asked us to put together this slide because we were always referring to just the purchase power budget. And she said, hey, we're not really accounting for as much solar as we have because we're only ever referring to how much we're buying and not how much is being produced in town. So this graph was meant to be an estimate because we don't really know. We don't have access to people's solar array production figures. But this is our estimate of what those people are producing. So it's not going to match the next slide, which is what we're buying.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's really interesting. And my other question is, someone referred to a restricted surplus and an unrestricted surplus. Can somebody explain what those are? And I think you explained where the restricted $3 million surplus came from, but what about the unrestricted?
So I think you're referring to the unrestricted net income, or it's essentially like stakeholders' equity.
Yes.
We are required to spend certain portions of our assets on restricted things that are restricted, and then we've also got some funds that are some equity that can be spent on just regular operating stuff. Does that?
So, so example would be power supply. That's supposed to be revenue neutral. So if we over collect on power supply, the excess money that we have has to be put back into power supply, whether it's by lowering customers' rates, but that would be a restricted fund that can only be used for that particular item. An unrestricted fund might be something where we have a net return annually of, say, $500,000. That's not restricted. That could be spent on a project or a number of different things. So there's a number of different funds that we have that are restricted and unrestricted, but those are just two examples.
Okay, thank you. And how much is currently in the unrestricted surplus?
Matt, do you have that number handy?
I can probably find it pretty quickly. If you refer to the audited financial statements, they give a breakdown of all of the restricted and all the restricted fund balances and what their purposes are. Let me see if I can find that really quickly.
Just approximately, doesn't have to be exact.
I know we drew it down this year by a pretty good number, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
And the policy is around 3 months, right, of operating?
Yeah, yep. And we're under the policy right now.
Right, yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any from participants. Oh, here we go, finding the number for.
So this is restricted cash. These are the balances as of December 31st, 2019. So these are for debt payments here. Some of the bigger ones, depreciation fund. Here's essentially our rainy day fund, emergency repairs fund. And then the underground fund we alluded to earlier. So,
Terry, does that answer your question?
She can't answer.
So I assume that means she's okay. I don't see a raised hand. Okay, I don't see any other questions from our audience. So Dave, if I'm not mistaken, we need to take a poll of a vote of the board to approve the budget going forward as a presentation to the select board and then to town meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, typically the board votes to recommend the budget to the town manager. And they either do that in this meeting or in the January meeting. So that's, up to you guys. If you're comfortable moving forward, you can. If you want to wait until January, we can. Either is fine.
So great, I'll turn this to the board. Does the board feel comfortable at this point making the recommendation to go forward? I understand from Stephen Crane that this will be presented again at the select board on January 11th. The next time we meet is what, January 10th?
Actually, it's the decarbonization plan that's going to be presented on the 11th. The budget is unscheduled.
Okay,
We typically present the budget to Stephen, Carrie LaFleur, John Harris in February. I don't know if that's going to change or not, but that's typically when we've done it in the past.
Yeah, the budget, because town meeting is scheduled for June instead of April, our timelines are a little pushed out. But we'll be putting forward a schedule probably just after the first of the year.
let me ask it this way. Is there any board member that is unable to take a position on whether to recommend moving forward with the budget as presented today, rather than wait till our next meeting in January? I don't see anyone saying that they are unable to do that. So I think we are, unless you have further questions for Matt or Laura or Dave, I would entertain a motion to approve a recommendation of this budget to the town manager.
I'll second.
I'll first I can't make the motion, so maybe you'll make the motion.
Sure. I move that we approve this budget to be presented to the town manager.
So Alice, Wendy,
Yes.
I just have one question for Dave. So as we went through this, and actually I'll just compliment the team because this is the first time I've been through a budget and there haven't been any open issues that need to be corrected. So kudos to you and your team because usually there's a lot of revisions.
Yeah.
But my question was, Matt, from your perspective, there's no open issues on this budget. There's nothing that we're really following up that's significant, correct?
Yeah, so the notes that I took, I need to look into the controlled hot water and I'll let you guys know on that. I think we answered the telecom loan payment, but I'll just double check and make sure if that needs to be added, I'll add it. The meter charge breakout, I'll work with Laura and see if I can do that on page 22 so that it is in with the details. And then the telecom payment in lieu of franchise thing.
That's not till next year, so you don't need to do
Oh,
anything.
not next year. Okay.
Yeah, and I say that to my recollection, I think that the controlled hot water heating is being reported this year, the same as it has been since forever.
Right.
So we've been, whatever the issue is there, it hasn't been a showstopper in the past. But I'd still be interested to know a little bit more about how that number is generated and perhaps reforming it going forward if necessary. But I don't think it's a huge amount of money, so it probably doesn't matter.
Right.
So I wouldn't hold up today because of it.
Right. So I would agree with that. I just want to clarify. Yep.
So I think, do we have a second on the motion to approve the budget as, I see a second from Gordon. This requires a roll call vote, so I will call in order that I see it on my screen. Wendy,
Approve.
Ryan,
Approve.
Gordon,
Approve?
Pam,
Approve.
Alice, approve. Okay, so I think we have completed our task. Are there any outstanding issues that we need to discuss for today's meeting? That anybody
No, I just
has?
want to take 1 minute to thank the staff. They did an excellent job putting this together. It was probably the smoothest year doing the budget that we've had, which
Great.
is great. So they deserve all the credit, and I'll take it.
As any manager might.
I was gonna say, maybe not all the credit.
You get some
Thank
too.
you all. We know how much work goes into preparing this and for getting it to us with at least a week's time to review it and read all the fine print. Laura, a superb job on the narrative on the power supply. I really appreciate that.
Definitely. Nice job,
Excellent.
as always. Great.
So this meeting, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting today?
So moved.
A
Happy New Year,
second?
everybody.
Brian seconds. How about raise hands for approval? I think everybody raised it. Okay, that looks unanimous.
I like it.
Happy New Year all. We'll see you in the start of the new year, January 10th.
Great.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.